Hi guys, now that we have finished watching the first video, we're going to start talking about the meaning behind this passage. So in the first video, we kind of talked about its structure and the meaning behind the words, and just a lot of literary phrases and vocabulary terms. In this video, we are going to be talking about meaning behind the whole passage and what it adds to the book and all of the underlying meanings of this passage. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is the phrase never shall I forget. We've already talked about how never shall I forget is a refrain, and just a little refresher, I know you guys just watched the video, but a refrain is a repeated structure that adds to the progression of the book. So in the first video I talked about that definition. In this video, I'm going to talk about how this refrain does add to the structure of the book. So, never shall I forget, again, repeated 8 times in this passage. So it's clearly important. It's clearly trying to be brought to our attention as the reader. And so the question that I would ask you would be why you think that it's so important, because there can be different beliefs attached to this. And so I just want you guys to think about why you think that this is important and why you think it was written so many times, because it's clearly trying to be brought to our attention by the author. So the phrase never shall I forget is really driving in the idea that the events that have happened leading up to this passage are really horrifying and are going to stick with our author for the rest of his life. As he said right over here, never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. He's saying that these things that he has seen and observed are so powerful and resonate so deeply with him that he is never going to forget them. They're going to affect him for the rest of his life. And so it's just a really important sentence, or rather part of a sentence, that really brings home the fact that this is something that's going to affect him for the rest of his life, and it's going to affect everybody involved in this for the rest of their lives. So it's just really talking about the importance and the horrors that have occurred that have stuck with him deep in his soul. So one thing I would like to also say is, why is this quoted so much? And again, everybody might have a difference of opinion on that, so I'd like you guys to go through and kind of answer why you think that it's quoted so much. So it's because we already touched on how it is so important. It's quoted so much because it truly shows the depth in how, no matter how much time passes by, the people who are affected by this and who saw the atrocities that were committed against the Jewish people by the Nazis, it's never going to leave them, and it's going to change them as a human being. We already see that it's kind of changing him, how he is saying that, like, it's consumed his faith and murdered his God. It's saying that it's affected him so deeply that he is now second guessing his faith, which is something that was so important in his entire life. And the atrocities that have occurred are so horrible that it's affecting his belief system and who he is on the inside eternally. Internally, not eternally. I'm sorry. Um, so the entire passage itself kind of pinpoints the point where people started to wake up and open their eyes to the atrocities that were occurring right in front of them. You know, they no longer are saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you know, people are overreacting. They're no longer kind of sweeping it under the rug. They're seeing it for what it truly is, and it's again resonating with them. They're finally opening their eyes to this, and now that their eyes are open, they're not going to be able to forget it. So that's like super, it's affecting everybody, not just him. It's everybody's opening their eyes to what's really happening in the world. For him, it represents a loss of his innocence. It changes him from thinking, the adults are going to take care of it and it's not going to affect me. I'm just a kid, or like God will save me. He is realizing that just because he's a kid doesn't mean these things aren't going to affect him, because he's seen them firsthand. And so this whole passage is showing his loss of innocence and his loss of being a child, his loss of childhood. And so that's really important. And I mean, it's devastating to think that anybody would lose their innocence, but it happens, and it still happens today. So this passage is just showing us truly how deeply it has affected him in his soul, in his faith, in his belief in the world and what is right and wrong, and his belief that people will help you out of situations, because he's quickly realizing that his parents can't really do anything about this. It's kind of every man for himself at this point, and he has to grow up because he has seen horrible things, and trauma really does make people grow up. And it's not a positive way of growing up. Nobody wants to grow up because they've seen trauma, but this is what is his reality. He's seeing, again, the atrocities. I keep repeating that word, but that's truly what they are. They're horrific events that will stick with him forever. Again, like he says, for as long as he lives, even if he lived as long as God himself, he will never forget it. And I kind of wanted to touch on this never right here. In the first video, I said that, the phrase never shall I forget was repeated 8 times. This is the 8th time right here, and it's not a completion of the phrase, but it reads as if he's kind of giving up. It's like, how I read it would be, never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never. It's kind of like, I'm defeated. I'm never gonna forget this. And so the incomplete phrase of never shall I forget at the end kind of shows his defeat and how he feels as if it's all out of his control and there's nothing that he can do to help it. And so that's what I just kind of wanted to point out, that this is, again, a loss of his naivety, and his innocence. And so I just wanted to have you guys and ask you guys how you read this passage when you first read it, like by yourself, and how you feel about it now, because I know opinions can change, and I know that I've thrown a lot of information at you in a short amount of time. It's only been 8 minutes. But I just kind of wanted to ask you guys how you feel. Why do you guys think that this passage is quoted so much? And what do you think that this adds to the completion of the book? Because it does add something, but everybody's going to have a kind of like a slightly different opinion on it. Everybody's going to be kind of similar. But I just want to hear what you guys are saying about this and understand that this is a very important passage in this book. It pinpoints, again, the time where people truly woke up. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about it as they're waking up, because of the motif of night. Night is seen, if you think about it in the literal sense, as we talked about in the first video, it's seen as someplace, like a time where you would fall asleep and dream. But as the motif, as this repeated metaphor, it is a time where people woke up to the atrocities. They're no longer dreaming happy things, because happy things aren't happening in the world. They're waking up and opening their eyes. So it's kind of like an opposite of what night is represented as. Night, you think of it again as you go to sleep, you go to bed, you dream, you rest, you recover for the day. In this, the metaphor of night is people are waking up. They are seeing the atrocities. They are opening their eyes to what's happening, and it's dark and it's horrible, and the entire world is like a nightmare to these people. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. And really just kind of try and think about how this passage affects your future readings. You know, as you continue through this book, think about how this passage kind of flipped the book. So those are a few things. This lesson is completed. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot from it. I know it's kind of throwing a lot of information at once at you, but I didn't want to make these videos too long for you. I wanted to keep you guys engaged throughout. Let me know if you have any questions. But as of right now, that is all. Have a nice day, guys.